Okay.
So good morning. It's certainly morning here. It's before sunrise in England, and it really just goes to show what an international event we have for you today. So welcome to the Energy Medicine Exchange Sound Summit, hosted by our dear friend Eeshi-Ra, and really just too excited myself. I was speaking at the World Energy Conference yesterday, and we rushed all the way down from Manchester so we could be here this morning to listen to and be here for this event. So God bless everybody, and I'm really excited to hand over the mic to my colleague and co-host. Here she is.
Hey everyone, well thank you so much for tuning in. I'm super excited to share my passion for sound and also many different people in my life who are amazing experts in their own right in the field of healing sound. I feel it's one of the fastest catalysts for helping this planet shift into a new frequency, and it's an amazing tool to benefit us in so many ways. And it is my absolute honor. Thank you so much, Thornton, for joining us and introducing this summit. I am very honored to be able to be here and share from myself and from these other brilliant souls joining me. And so it is my deeper honor to introduce to you my guiding light, who has been in my life since 2001, the brilliant and the amazing Randy Masters. And we are tuning in, I'm tuning in from Bali, and it is just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And Randy's tuning in from California. Hey, Randy. Welcome.
Yeah, right here. Yep. California still exists.
That's good.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. We didn't fall into the ocean, but it is a state of mind.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming and tuning in. Wow. That's a plane. Okay. So I am really fascinated to hear with what you are sharing today. So what was the title of your talk that you wanted to bring to everyone here?
It was basically about using certain sounds for raising consciousness and affecting people in a quantum way. As focusing on tuning forks as in terms of a modality for delivering. So I'm limiting it to that type of sound and sound healing and sound application world. All kinds of things about tuning forks. So welcome to Toontown. That's what I call it.
Awesome. Great. Well, I am very intrigued and curious to know what you'd like to share. So I would love to know, we talked about the theme for the summit, which is choice of the best frequencies. We are in a time of immense challenge on the planet, and it feels that because sound is such a great catalyst for change and transformation, that it's really good to zoom in on the best choice of frequencies. So I am curious to know, if you had to choose a single important frequency, what would you say that would be for humans at this time?
The latest one going around right now that has scientific background behind it, so it's not coming out of channeling and it's not coming out of a new age type of place, is from Hart in California, from Roland McCraty. And the science research, they found that the 0.1 hertz is something the Earth is giving off, and is one of the solid most important frequencies that they're focusing on. Now, what they do at Hart, which I admire, is they put equipment on people, science equipment, to measure their brain waves, the heart rate variability, all kinds of things, and they test what these frequencies are doing to people, what kind of zone they go to. So that particular frequency is right now, that's the going number one within the science, within brain waves. And it's something that the Earth is putting out. There's a lot of different Earth frequencies that I can talk about, but that is absolutely the hottest number that's going right now. Now, what's very interesting about that note, 0.1, delta goes from 4 hertz down to 0.5. So we're talking less than that. below the established window for delta frequencies. When you octavize 0.1 up by octaves by multiplying by 2, so one octave you would get would be 409.6. In other words, if I take it up many, that's an A flat. That's the A flat of A flats within just tuning and just intonation and so on, that I compare all the other A flats to, okay? And what it is, it's the undertone, an octavized undertone of 5 hertz. 5 hertz is an E note. And I'll get back to that because that's an important one as well. So those two are reciprocals of each other. And this is a very important thing that I'm doing in my teaching that I'm not aware of very many people paying attention to. And it has to do with as above, so below. So the as above, the way I'm teaching in sound healing, is the overtone series, multiplying any note by 1 on up as high as you want to go, or even selecting certain numbers, but multiplying. So that's the overtone definition. Undertones is the reverse. You're dividing into it. So if I chose like a multiple of 2 hertz, then, and I divided 5 into that, then I've got the 5th undertone. So that's the as below, and they're mirror images. And I use this term octavized reciprocals, because if you put 1 over a certain frequency, you can be down so far. I mean, no, humans don't hear it. There may be certain species that do. Then I start multiplying it by octaves to get it into some usable range. And obviously, 0.1 is not a usable range for audio, okay? Because humans rarely hear much below 20 hertz. Some could go down to 16, which is a C. 20 hertz is an E. And that's it. And it goes all the way up to about 20,000 hertz and a little bit higher for some people. That's way lower than dolphins and other species that have a greater range even than humans have. And elephants that are way down around 4 hertz and things. So, and whales down in 4 and 8. Fascinating what different creatures are doing. However, how to impact humans doesn't mean we have to hear something in order for that sound to be there and be affecting our field, our quantum field, our various bodies that we have, whatever different belief systems have about what to call those bodies, the different subtle bodies and so on. So 0.1 is very useful. So how you get that, one way to get that is to take any 2 frequencies like in an audible range and have them be 0.1 different. And then we don't hear 0.1, we're getting a pulsation. No, we're not hearing 0.1 hertz, but we get a pulsation. And that's an important distinction. So it's so one of the ways that I do that, that's really fun, and this relates to your work, Eeshi-Ra, too, is I could take the 136.1 hertz Earth tropical year in that octave, the frequency of the 365.242 days in a year, turned into seconds, and then they put 1 over that, and then you octavize it. I mean, I went quickly there, but anybody wants to hear this, you can rewind a bunch of times. I've rewound for years, right? I've been teaching these things for more than 30 years. So I've done a lot of rewinding, so it's worth it. If you're really interested. I don't want to dwell on math things too much when I don't need to. So then, now that Earth tropical year has more decimals to it, but most of the tuning fork companies, and they call it an ohm, and I want to address that because in terms of things that are affecting us, but 136.1 is what almost all the companies make it to, 1 decimal point. Then if I make another one to 136 exactly, which is a C sharp note, it's the 17th harmonic octavized, and that's very important. Then the difference between 136.1 minus 136 is the 0.1. So if you do it that way, what you'd be hearing, assuming you can tune into it, is a pulsation of 0.1. Now, that pulsation can be created with any 2 favored frequencies that you're wanting to deal with. And there's some really neat ones out there that are very effective. So then this presents one of the ideas here is that I isolated a target frequency, the 0.1. Now we have something else going on. What are the two different tuning forks that or these could also be gongs and bells and other sounds, but right now for tuning forks that I want to use, I am going to get my result of my 0.1, but I could use other frequencies that have been outstanding. And like one that you use a lot this year too, and I do, the 111 hertz. Very important, and it's been tested as a cell rejuvenation frequency. And there's a lot of things. Yep, I can't hear that, but anyway, I know what it sounds like. I've played it enough times that I can imagine it, you know. And sometimes that, by the way, if you do that, you can get the effective sound thinking about certain sounds. And if we have time, I can get into that. That's another very interesting aspect. Doesn't mean you always have to hear it to have the effect of that sound. Even thinking about it can affect the nervous system. I've even worked with people and didn't have a tuning fork in my hand, and somebody opened their eyes. They said, "Well, what fork are you using?" And I would say, "Well, open your eyes." And I didn't have any fork in my hand at all, and the frequencies were transmitting because I've worked with them so many, countless hours. Let's say, that way. So another one. So if I took 111, I could do 111.1. Then I've got a known cell rejuvenation frequency plus this 0.1. The other example is saying, okay, the Earth is giving off by the scientific test a 0.1, and we've got the Earth tropical year, which is one of the ways that a lot of people connect with the Earth, and that's been called the Ohm, because there's a lot of bells and gongs from, especially in Asia, that are tuned to that C sharp. And in addition to that, sitars, for a lot of time in India, were tuned to C sharps because the length of the sitar is 88 centimeters in length, and the C sharp perfectly resonates with the sitar. And so a lot of years in the history of East Indian classical music primarily, a C sharp was used for the fundamental, like their do, they call it sa, S-A, sa. And so that's why that's come to be called an ohm. Plus, it's the Earth's journey. It's not really around the sun. It's a vortexing orbit. It's moving like this. It's not, if it was really a circle, we'd be in Groundhog Day. We keep coming back to the same place. And that's not really a good idea. We would not have grown. It's redundant. We'd have to go back here. We go again, rewind, and that's not the way. But those notes are used by a lot of people. In fact, one particular sound healing researcher that I admire who's passed away, they helped create acutonics, is Marjorie DeMunk. And she put out sound healing with Ohm tuning forks, and she spelled it O-H-M, like in electrical engineering, which is really cute. But so she's got like 20 procedures in her book, and it comes with a CD where she's filmed a client using all the procedures that are in the book. But what's very interesting is all the tuning forks she's using are different octaves of the Earth tropical year. So, okay, so why? Because people connect with it, they ground with it, which is why I'm talking about this. The 0.1 is something with the Earth. It's not coming from somewhere else for now. And the Ohm notes is something with the Earth. So it's a nice centered place to begin to connect with people. And it makes a lot of sense in that type of way. So all of her techniques are like 34.025, 68.05, 136.1, 272.2, 544.4. And she used the highest one she used was 1088.8. Those are all just octaves of the same Earth tropical year note. And she has crystal bowls and some Tibetan bowls that she's been able to accumulate, tuned to that. And now it works. And what she's doing is putting the tuning forks primarily on acupuncture and acupressure points. And people can relate to that Ohm as something that's very relaxing. So in terms of starting with something like that, and then maybe branching out into either more esoteric or far out or other kinds of agendas that one might want to work with, but starting someplace that you kind of meet somewhere that's very centered. And there's a lot of goodness in that.
Yeah,
Now
I've
I do.
the 136.1. I use it in cellular sonics, and it's
Yeah.
so great for muscle tension, which
Yeah,
can,
exactly, which is what she's working with as well. Now, all of her techniques, I will say, I'll stand behind this, can be done with other tuning forks and not use the ohm forks at all, and
oh,
use the points that she has, because there's tremendous amount. I mean, it's infinite number of different frequencies with weighted or unweighted tuning forks that can be placed on acupuncture points around, on the body, off the body, moving around the body, all kinds of different ways that can be beneficial to. But she just limited it to that one thing, and that's there's a lot of good merit in that type of thing. So the other thing that I've done with that is in using binaural beats, and that there's a little different technique there, that it's not the same as the difference tones like we had. Okay, where you take a frequency and octavize it, and then you take your target frequency and you split it in half, and you take half of it and add it to this new frequency, and then you take the same frequency and subtract it. Then the original tuning fork that you started with, or sound frequency, you don't use that. You use the other two, and the difference will be the target that you want, which is very neat. But my favorite way is to have two frequencies that are auspicious, that I really like, and I also get the proper difference tones as well. So that kind of, I'm stacking correspondences, so
right.
that makes it
That's,
very.
that's how I work too. Yeah.
Yeah. So just so you, all of you in the audience, if you have a certain frequency you want to work with, that's one way to do it. And if you wanted to work with like 64 hertz, which is a real common frequency for the base of the spine, they've done a lot of research, and it's an average frequency for the spine, a C note. You could just take 64 and add 64.1 and play 64.1 with a 64, because you want to work with a 64, and it's very low. And there may be a reason why you want to be in those lower register than
Yes.
where I was talking. I mean, that's all the different octaves have potentially different effects. The same musical note, up or down octaves, can have tremendously different effects, even though it's just the same note. Like if it's on a piano or some musical instrument, you're just playing an octave higher or an octave lower. But on a human body, and not exclusively human bodies, I include animals. I have friends that work with animals and all kinds of things with the tuning forks as well. There are different octaves that are very useful. Another group, now, when I look at the categories of what would you want to be doing with a tuning fork for raising consciousness, we might not spend as much time talking about symptoms and frequencies of the organs in the body and all of that on a very physical level. Although helping and assisting in clearing up physical problems certainly eases things up for when people want to get into their meditations and exploring their spirituality and developing their consciousness. And if somebody's in enough pain, they often have a lot of trouble meditating. So to bring down the pain levels is, helps for the desired result of going for the consciousness. So sometimes you have to do something first in order to equalize, in order to take those, let's say, deeper kind of steps in the consciousness spiritual areas, instead of just jump right in. You need some way to connect with somebody. So that doesn't mean that that's a lower consciousness. That's meeting somebody where they are, and then they can relax, you kind of get with the program, get in tune with each other, the room, the space, and whatever, and then start dialing into more interesting areas, let's say, auspicious areas that you might want. And another one that I love a lot, it's called the trithalmic frequency. And what it is, it's 1.45 hertz. It's a G flat note. And I name notes with prime numbers after them, because all G flat notes are not the same, by the way. And so 1.44 is a different G flat than 1.45, just to give you an idea. I won't go into that, but I name them. So the 1.45 is G flat 29, because it any prime numbers higher than 7, well, higher than 5, that are involved in the frequency, when you take the frequency apart and look at the internal numbers, that gives you very specific frequencies that are different than the same name of a note, like a G flat, based on a different prime. And so I label everything that I study in the universe, no matter whether it's miles, temperatures, distances, light. I give them musical names, even though the units are different. And I'm very precise. I don't know really anybody else making tuning forks that does this, that's that precise with the name of the note. I don't just put G flat unless that's all it is. But if it has another prime number in it higher than 5, that's important. Now, why? Here's another reason, and I'll go back to the 1.45 in a moment. But see, our typical Schumann resonance now, the most commonly measured, even though it spikes once in a while, it comes back to 7.83 is the most common average. And there's a whole bunch of Schumann frequencies, but the main low one that everybody mostly talks about is 7.83. So if I take that frequency and divide it by 5.4, I get the 1.45. They're in the same tuning system. So the Schumann 7.83 is called C flat 29, and I think I have a little plus after it, and it has another meaning. And there's a harmonic relationship between that Schumann and this trithalmic one. Now, what's important about the trithalmic one is that it balances the pituitary, pineal, and the hypothalamus with the heart. That's 4 things: pituitary, pineal, hypothalamus with the heart, all with one frequency that we don't hear. So all we can hear is a pulsation. So what I often do with that is I'll play like 128 low C, below middle C, and add 1.45, and now I've got 129.45 as my second tuning fork. I could subtract it too, doesn't matter, as long as they're different. I'll take the 111 and add 1.45, and that's been very popular because of all the benefits of the 111 and the benefits of 1.45. Now I've got a little more going on all at the same time, and I do that when possible or when desired, you know. So then I have 112.45 and 111, and you get the 1.45 pulsation. You don't hear the hertz, you hear that as a rhythm, a rhythmic pattern.
Yeah,
I could even.
Why do they call it trithalamic? Do you want to share about that so people understand how the effect is for the brain?
About what part? Excuse me?
About the trithalamic and how that benefits the brain?
Well, what it's doing is it's synchronizing these organs inside the brain. Now, these are key organs for generating hormones and consciousness and left and right brain synchronization and going deep into different levels of consciousness. They work with light and transducing, transceiving light, which is both receiving and transmitting. The term for that is transceiver. So our pineal glands are huge for that. So this is one of the frequencies that I like for helping to get the pineal gland toned up, which has been toned down because of a lot of stuff that's happened in the world, things that are in foods and pollutants and things in the water. There's fluoride, other things like that. They're really clogging up that gland's ability to receive the level of light that we're supposed to be running on. And no matter what you believe about consciousness and spirituality and all the beliefs and things, our ability to be linked up with creation and running the light, that's what we were designed to be running on. And people are like running around with gasoline in their tank with sand in it. And it's not working that well, you know. It's clogging up the motor. And the motor here is this motor of running these incredible light, the Kundalini energy and all that, all fits in complements together with this. So now what I found very interesting that put me on to that frequency was also work by Alexander Putney. He wrote a book called Phi, P-H-I, and I met with him, and he had got a list of pyramids and sacred sites around the world that are putting out, however they do it, 1.45 hertz that's been measured. that somehow the way those sacred sites were built, it's emanating this 1.45. Very, very interesting. Now, because of the 7.83 of the Schumann, of all the different Schumann ones, and the 1.45, those are in the same tuning system built on the number 29, by the way. So that's linked. What these sacred sites are putting out is linked to the Schumann. I would wonder if the Schumann changed, are these sacred sites, will they change? Are they able to shapeshift their frequency? Which brings in another point in asking about what can we do today? What works for humans today? Some ancient frequencies still work because of wherever they came from. They were not locked into and limited in a historical time frame. Others might not do what they used to do because of how we're progressing and the other factors that we are having to deal with, the noise in the world and the pollution and the chemicals and things. So there may be a modulation or a change. The frequency may go up, it might go down. It might not be where it was a couple thousand years ago. So some things have to be tested to see, does it still work today to do this, or does it need to change? And one of the ways that I work with that is I have tuning forks, aluminum tuning forks made with a very high grade of space age aluminum, which isn't what most companies use. And I have them made in temperature control with machines that are used for calibrating radar and making tuning forks for radars. So that's very precise. And I've had aluminum forks made to 5 decimal points. Well, most companies can only guarantee 1, maybe 2 decimal points in accuracy. The point is if I have a certain number, and this is important in the consciousness, a certain number that I want to convey, I want that number stamped on the tuning fork if it's possible, so that that intention is in the fork, even if you don't sound it. It was made to a certain frequency, and that frequency has a certain number, and those numbers have meanings. And those numbers with those different meanings communicate in the quantum field to consciousness. And that is part of the power of it. Now, let's say you're working with a client and they need that frequency to go up or down a little. So one of the things that happens, interestingly enough, is the temperature in the room can change. The temperature of your hand holding the fork can change. The temperature of the fork itself. Piano tuners, what they used to do before they used electronic tuning machines, they would carry the tuning forks in their pocket and keep them warm. Then when they were ready to take them out and tune the piano, they'd reach in their pocket, pull out the fork, and the fork would be at the right temperature to be useful for the tuning, as opposed to picking up a fork that's like ice cold. And so it's not going to be at the frequency it needs to be. So one of the things that I work with is I turn it over to spirit to allow fluctuations. I have them made very rigorously to a certain frequency and a number of decimal points, if there are decimals. And then I allow spirit to take it from there, because I've done my part. The manufacturer's done their part, unless something happens to the fork. Now, if spirit needs that frequency to go up or down, no problem. That's another dimensional aspect of working with sound. And musicians have to deal with that, when they're doing performances outdoors and it's hot or it's cold and their instruments are changing temperature. It's part of that reality of acoustic instruments. So I'm using that type of thing as another factor within all of this. So there's a lot of talk about different kinds of frequencies that do things that haven't necessarily been tested in a science way with equipment that can measure what's happening and measure what's happening to the person. Are there changes in their blood? Are there changes in their hormones? Are there changes in brain waves? All of that kind of stuff. There's tons of equipment that can measure it. And most healers don't have that equipment and don't have a scientist friend with open lab hours that they can go in and play. But eventually, there'll be funds for testing more of these things. I'm very cautious with a lot of internet information about what tuning forks do that hasn't been proven, like 528 hertz, and that comments that it repairs broken DNA, which it doesn't do. That was made up. And a lot of people believe that. So they've given an additional meaning to the 528, which has wonderful aspects. But that is not an attribute that's tested in any of the labs. But people believe it. Now, maybe you can say, well, if enough people believe it, it'll do that. And that could happen too. That's certainly a possibility. But there are other things going on. Now, another area that I work with for affecting consciousness is the area of Gematria, where you have alphanumerics is another term, where you have numbers to go with alphabets, like Hebrew alphabet, Sanskrit, many Egyptian, and so on. And I work with a lot of different languages, and I translate certain words into the numbers, and I make a tuning fork for that number. I've done the whole tree of life that way. So, for instance, for the female, the feminine light body field, Shekinah, or Shekinah, people pronounce them different ways for different reasons. But anyway, the number is 385. So in Hebrew, Shekinah in Hebrew turns out to be the number 385. Okay. So then what am I doing there? When I play the 385, it's already known in the quantum field about that language and number correspondence relative to that number. Now, there's a lot of other things that go with 385 as well. I'm not addressing all of them because 385 will address everything that 385 is associated with. That's how that works within the field. The numbers are specific. They relate to a lot of things. For instance, in English, if you do the Gematria for cancer, if you do the 1 through 9, 1 through 9, 1 through 8 way, not 1 through 26 way of doing the numerology and the letters, the alphanumerics, cancer will add up to a 26 and it will reduce to an 8. So there's a lot of other things that do that. Yahweh reduces to 26 and reduces to an 8. So you have a drawer with everything in our world, all the herbs, essences, homeopathic remedies, everything, and you get a number and then you reduce it. It's called root reduction. So you just add the numbers up and reach. So 26, 2 plus 6 is an 8. That's the root reduction. Well, it's interesting when you open, I did this study in 6 languages with all this stuff. You open up drawer number 8, and here's all these herbs that address cancer, for instance, and essential oils that all kinds of things are in drawer number 8 that are not in drawer 7 or 9 or any of the others. Very interesting. So you can work with the root reductions and have a certain effect. You can then also work with that number. So I do a lot with that particular alphanumeric type of thing. Shekinah is fun. Metatron, for instance, when we were getting into archangels and that, if you wanted to work with that, is 314. The first 3 numbers of most values of pi, is 314. That's interesting. That's one of Metatron has another number that's 964 as well. Depends on how you do the numerology, Kabbalistic or out of the everyday Hebrew language. But it's fascinating. And I'm not saying this in a religious way. These are cosmic light languages, a lot of these languages in the world. And so there's much more going on behind it that goes beyond a given culture. So just to give you an idea. So one of the things I've been pioneering in my work is developing lots of tuning forks that are based on the different meanings. So like we go back to the 528 for a moment. In Greek, the truth, the word the truth in Greek is the number 528. So that's very interesting. And there's other things in different octaves because they've done studies on water. And since we're 70+% water, tuning forks greatly, and other sounds too, but greatly affect the water in our body. It's part of affecting our consciousness is tuning the water in our body and in our cells. And so that's super important. Well, there's a many different frequencies. 44 hertz, which is an F11 actually, and 66 hertz, which is an octave above 33. Those two notes are a perfect fifth, 3/2 apart, which creates stability, those notes together. So when you have a fifth like that, the lower note's going to come off as the root. And I use a lot of intervals of fifths to help create stability when working with the different frequencies. Because no matter what the two frequencies are, if I have that perfect fifth, there's a type of home and a type of stability that gets communicated. And that helps go into the higher consciousness areas by creating more stability and hopefully lessening any wobbles that one might have in their field.
Yeah, and you were talking also about frequencies for harmonizing the chakras as well, weren't you?
Yeah, and I want to mention my thoughts about that because that's a vast, very vast area on that. So that was one of the things, and another one for water that I use, and this is very important because we were working on a documentary for 15 years on the consciousness of water. So we interviewed lots of scientists and worked with people looking into the science, the physics of water as one level. And there's other sound frequencies that are very important to water. And I use those to help communicate to the water in the body of another human. That's a type of attunement. Tune the water in their body, and that then it's a liquid crystal communicating through all these networks and the tissues and so on. Well, as people know about that importance of water. So for hydrating water, which is a very physical thing, 22.5 hertz, which is an F sharp with a little plus after it. That frequency, 22.5, right down at the bottom. Well, a lot of people might not hear that frequency. Some, because it's so low. That aids in the hydrating of water for that specific effect. Now that's different than half of 44 would be 22, but the 22 hertz does not do that hydrating. So sometimes you have to be very precise because there's a domain that 22.5 does that 22 doesn't do, or 23 won't do, you see. And those are things to pay attention to. So a part of working with the consciousness is also working with tuning the water body. So the way that the 528 then relates to water, since so many people are interested in that note, because it's part of those, what was called the solfeggios, is you octavize it down and you get 66 hertz. And that's one of the water frequencies in the water molecule. So it does relate, it's a higher octave of that, but not repairing DNA. Now, what I'm doing for the DNA is I have actual DNA frequencies that have been studied. And 8.54 trillion hertz, put a bunch of decimals, that Fritz Popp studied in Marburg in Germany, is the maximum resonance of the DNA. So when you drop that down by octaves, you get the frequency of the 24-hour solar day, 86,400 seconds in a solar day. And in one octave, that'll be 194.18074,074. It's the 675th undertone, okay, that note, okay, and it has a repetan, a lot of decibels, and they keep repeating and that type of thing. So I work with that particular one. Now, what's really interesting is I pair that with its opposite. So its opposite is going to be any octave of the number 675, which is an E sharp with a plus after it, 675. It's just multiples of fives and such, and 27, there's multiples of threes and fives in that, okay? So our DNA is built around that as the undertone, the 675th undertone. So in my as above, so below, in working with the DNA, I use the target note in a convenient octave, and I use its inverse, octavized inverse, as a pair. Now, when I'm working on chakras, I can use one on the front of the chakra and another one on the back of the chakra because they spin in different directions, coming in the front of the body and spinning out the back of the body. And they change direction of spin throughout the day. They're not fixed. It always goes one way. They don't work. They change because of many different reasons why chakras have to do that. So that's one of the opposite things that I work with. Now, another thing that's been very interesting, I was told by John Fox years ago in a channeling, he channeled a book that I recommend and I use in with sound. It's called Starlight Elixirs. And it's all about, a friend of mine started collecting starlight in a telescope from all these different stars, and they started making essences. The Pegasus company sells them. So if you want to get something to Alcyone or whatever, you can get that starlight turned into a vibrational liquid elixir. And I've done workshops where we're working on star systems. And then the other thing I do to complement with that is I can convert the light years distance of a star to the Earth into sound frequencies and work with the sound and with the light in the liquid, which is kind of like a homeopathic substance. And those two working together is a very powerful mixed media. And I've done that for whole classes where we're exploring aspects of different sound star systems for a reason, why we're doing that, and helping to unlock our individual connections with different stars that are in our greater blueprint beyond this life, that type of work. So that's kind of esoteric, in a way, That's not the generic person walking in off the street with a pain in their shoulder, wanting help for the pain, but lots of people are seriously looking for how do we quicken our consciousness, this ascension type of thing. So that's one way that I work with that. And also I've taken the Cryon book channeled by Lee Carroll called Cryon Book 12. And the name of the subtitle is The 12 Layers of DNA, not strands, layers. And for each one of those layers is a Hebrew word or words. And I've translated those all into the numbers by the Gematria, alphanumerics. And I make 2 different sets of tuning forks with 12 forks in each one, for 1 fork for each one of those layers. And that's something I'm experimenting with. And I have a healer that's working a lot with that. That's one of the main body talk practitioners. And she's a being that communicates with all kinds of species, animals, insects, and all of that. Very, very interesting. So that's another way of dealing with the DNA. We measured the frequency. A friend of mine, a scientist who had a lab, of Sai Baba's vibhuti, that powder that he creates. And I do a lot of work for different companies where I analyze the numbers that they get and tell them what about the numbers. So I suggested that we do this project, and it turns out it's rhodium, iridium, and carbon that David Hudson and others have talked about. The white gold powders and that type of thing. And it turns out that vibhuti is a harmonic of the DNA resonance. Now, I knew that because I had already done the work on the DNA. And then when I got the readout, instantly I knew exactly what was going on with that. So that vibhuti has that powder, has that ability as a superconductor. And the frequency that it gives off is a frequency that's a harmonic in with the DNA, which is, it goes on and on. I'm not going to trip out too much on all the mathematical interactions, because if I wrote all these out, you'd see that the creator, his master plan involves numbers and sound, and that's where it's coming from. And that's what I'm teaching. And I take that into sacred geometry as well. Now, another area that I work with, besides the Gematria, that I do tons of stuff with the Gematria, and that's been really, really, really fun. In fact, for balancing the male and female energy, one of the things that I use from Gematria are the pillars of King Solomon's temple. There's a black female pillar and a white male pillar. And the female pillar is the number, it's Boaz, B-O-A-Z, and the number is 79, which is an E note. It's also a prime number. And the male pillar, Jachin, Jachin, that number is 729. Interesting, the 7 and 9 put a 2 in between. I mean, who knows? And that's an F sharp with 2 pluses after it, the 729. So, and I use that as an unweighted fork, and the 79 I make with weights on it because it's so low. And then you can apply that to the body and work meditatively with the client or with the whole class, visualizing that, running those pillars. And the whole idea is for a male or a female to strengthen both of those archetypes, both of those aspects of the natural polarity of creation. There's no positive and negative, really. There's female energy and there's male energy. And there's lots of characteristics of what each of those are. And those need to be balanced in us for other things in our consciousness to work. And when it's not, there could be problems. So I have a number of pet forks, you might say. I feed them very well. They're very, very friendly, you know. But my pet forks, I mean, there was a pet rock in California back in the early 70s. And, you know, that was a big thing. A rock all packaged up and wrapped up. Just a rock, regular rock, you know.
They were so fun.
You know, a real California thing there, that's for sure, you know. But I have a number of ones that I use for doing things like that, balancing the male and the female, and working with the three different hearts. You know, you have the heart chakra, we have the physical heart, and we have what's called the sacred heart. And the sacred heart is located between the left shoulder blade and the spine. And it's like a sacred cave. And you've got to quiet the mind, get rid of all the noise and nonsense to get in there. But that's one of the things that I work with in classes and in meditations and such. And there's a number of different forks that work, opening the heart and quieting the noise helps in the development of consciousness. Because a lot of times the consciousness gets stuck there. People don't really feel, or they've had traumas and they don't fully express with their heart or lead with their heart. They're leading with their brain, and that's in the driver's seat, and that's created a few problems in the world, you know. So the leading with the heart and using the brain, but not being used up by the brain, you see.
Yeah.
And the mind thought, you know.
Yeah, it's so important. And a lot of the brain switching, you know, there's that great doctor, Dr. Dope, who recommends doing this for 20 seconds and here getting the hemispheric rebalancing happening.
Are you talking Dr. Joe Dispenza?
No, Dr. Dope. He's a German doctor, and he talks about brain switching, which is happening about people using technology.
Well, the tuning forks work very good. Different pairs, moving them over the head and around the head in different ways, automatically starts balancing the brain out in that way. I'll often use the tuning forks for the pituitary and the pineal as a pair and move them around in that kind of way.
The 111 is amazing because it causes a temporary shift into the right hemisphere. You were talking about musicians and frequencies that they can focus on. What would you like to share about that?
Well, this is very interesting because depending on the tuning system, usually they'll choose one note of an auspicious frequency, and then they'll apply the tuning system that they're using, referencing to that note, like the way A440 has been used for a couple hundred years, and a lot of A432 that Verdi, the composer Verdi, used 432, and that's becoming very, very popular now. And 444 is less popular, but it's an octave of a cell rejuvenation frequency, and I like that one quite a lot, but that's higher. So the pitches have been going on, and you don't have to tune to A notes. Mozart did 421.6, and he called it an A, but it was really a G sharp by today's standard, 421.6. And Handel, the tuning fork was invented in modern times, quote unquote, by John Shore, a trumpet player in Handel's orchestra, 1732 or 1736, right in there, rediscovered the tuning fork. And so a lot of composers have used different A notes, but others have used other notes as their reference point. And it just depends. Now, what I did for like 20 years, I tuned my pianos to the frequency of Venus, the rotation of Venus, which is a note that's a higher A than 440. And because of the love from Venus that I was wanting to tune to, that's why I chose working with that particular note. But so I did that for a long time, and I worked with a group from Mexico that I was the musical director with. And when we tuned to that note, the vibe in the band was better. And the lead singer had a quena flute from Peru that would fit right with that frequency. So it was better that we tuned up. Later on, when they got away from using that frequency, stuff broke down in the band, personality, all kinds of stuff. But when I was insisting on doing that with the Venus, everybody had, because it was a Latin band, a salsa band, and it had a more of a feminine energy in it than you usually get from a lot of different salsa bands.
Amazing. In Pythagoras, you know, there's that great quote from David Fiddler out of Jesus, Son of God, talking about Pythagorean thought and saying, if you have that divine logos, you have that code, that canon, that everything then produces a harmonious state, and it's helpful for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. So there's many things to do. Now, one that I found extremely fascinating in my research was a friend of mine plays sitar, and he studied with Ali Akbar Khan. And I said, well, what does Ali Akbar Khan tune to? And he said, he tunes to 268.8. Technically, that's called D flat 7 with a plus. But he was using it as a C sharp, which is irrelevant for his use. You just call it a C sharp, okay. And he asked him, why did he do that? He says, because that's what I hear. Okay, fine. So I'm starting to look at, it's, 272.2 would be the Earth tropical year C sharp, right? So it's a little lower than that. Then I did some work. I got some books by a physicist studying matter and antimatter named Edward Ostrander. And he found the key frequency for matter creation came out of the Milky Way and was 4,303 hertz, 4303. That's 13 times 331, 2 prime numbers, okay? And he pinned it down after all this research to that number. So I go, okay, I'm making tuning forks to it. People love it. I dropped it down by octaves, now lower than that, because that is it's a really in the pitch of C sharp, but the name of the note is a C, but it's really in the pitches of C sharp technique. All right, I dropped it down, and what the frequency is 268.9375. 268.9375 compared to Ali Akbar Khan's 268.8. Okay, what? Is Ali Akbar Khan so tuned? That he's hearing the frequency out of the Milky Way? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, because a lot of the adept musicians who meditate and are totally committed to spiritualism with their music and are extremely tuned into the universe can hear things in the music of the spheres. And that just blew me away.
That's amazing.
So, musicians can play with that 268.9375. Okay. If you had an 88 key piano, 4303 would be the 89th key. You'd have to add another key to get it. It's a 1/2 a step up there more. You could tune the high note to that if you wanted to, but it's pushed it up into the C sharp. So I do a lot of things like that. Then I will do things like take some of the different, what they called solfeggio frequencies. And a lot of people are having powerful impact from those frequencies, which I worked with the guy that discovered them, Joseph Paleo. And they are just numbers in the Bible. They're not sound frequencies.
Yeah.
The next use I found of that were companies making LED light machines that pulse the light to those 6 original frequencies. So you just change the setting, and you can't see it because, if you set it to 528 pulses, you can't see that. It looks like a steady beam. So I was working with a company, and my role was to bring frequencies into their LED machines. And I've done it, that with lasers and things as well. It's very interesting to work with a lot of those different frequencies. And if you have a light machine, to work with lights with the sound together, and there's a lot of light machines where you can program the frequencies of how to pulse the light yourself. They come with a whole little computer program. Well, I've been feeding those into people's machines and all kinds of cell rejuvenation frequencies and different things like that, which is awesome. You don't hear them because it's not based on hearing the sound. It's based on pulsing the light. So another thing that I'm doing to get the effects that I'm getting sometimes is I will take a wavelength of light from a laser or an LED, and I will convert it into sound so that the person with that tool, a laser or an LED light machine, can have tuning forks of the exact conversion in a convenient octave then of what that light is. So you're not just using like a red note. It's the exact red note that's a conversion from the exact wavelength of the red light. And there's a lot of lights. So this gets very interesting because Fred Bell used a blue laser at 464 nanometers. And I was doing a radio show with him, and he was interviewing me. And so I had my calculator there. So I thought, I wonder what that is in sound. So I did the conversion. I started dropping, and it turned out to be 147.00. Okay, 147 is the lowest of the 18
Yeah.
frequencies that expanded. Judy Cole and I both co-discovered at the same time, different ways. Her guides gave them to her and said, here, this is called Zobe. It's Hebrew. It means in the house of the Lord. And I just worked them out mathematically.
Right.
So, but these are very, very interesting things to do. So I did an experimental music project of tuning the harp with Joel Andrews to a set of 7 out of these 18 tones to see what would happen. It was very, very mind-blowing because we actually were making music, but we had to go beyond the original 6 because those are not in one convenient musical scale. There's a couple perfect fourths, 4/3, and those create stability. So you have 396 and 528 perfect fourth. That's a stable interval. And then the 852 and 639 is another perfect fourth. But they're in different tuning systems. They're not in the same thing at all.
Right.
So that gets tricky. But I've been encouraging musicians to get into what are they tuning to. So if you have some specific thing you want, and you have instruments that you can tune, and that the instruments can still play in tune with this new frequency. In other words, it's not too high a pitch or too low a pitch to adjust the tunings of the instrument. There's a lot of synchronicities, because then when you make music like that, like anybody that makes music at 432, they're in harmony with everything that 432 is about.
Right. And do you still have your piano tuned to 432?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of them. Actually, 2 of them I have tuned to that.
Right.
I have other things that I do for different reasons, and there's like a lot of reasons why I use that particular tuning because of what it puts us in touch with. Now, something else I found very interesting is that when they studied sacred sites around the world, and some of them were underground temples, like the Hypogeum in Malta, they found 2 frequencies that are the sum of all the temples, 110 hertz or 111 hertz, only 1 hertz difference.
Yeah.
Now that's interesting. The Hypogeum, one place there, it was 110, and when the wind blows through that underground temple, it produces the 110 hertz. Right. So they studied these with science equipment, trying to figure out why did they do that. And it turns out it put people into a certain kind of synchronization with their right brain for doing the spiritual work. They were very intent on that specific frequency till the whole temple resonated to that frequency.
Yeah, it's very cool. And actually Newgrange in Ireland, that also tunes in with the 111, the standing wave. Paul Devereaux, he was actually featured in a Channel 4 documentary, which is TV in the UK, and found that the main predominant standing wave in Newgrange in Ireland, which is just south of Dublin, is, or maybe it's north, is 111. And
wow.
And that lines up with the winter solstice, the sunrise at winter solstice. And
these things are very important, very, very important. And also, when I was using the 111 and I added the 0.1, so I have 111.1, that also is communicating in 1111, as well as another one of the correspondences that are in the numbers. So that's very important. Yeah. And what's also important that is not obvious to most people is when I take apart a number and factor the primes and figure what prime numbers are inside this particular number. Like 111 is 3 times 37. Well, there's a lot of significance of 3 and a lot of significance of 37. and that's important. The internal chemistry of those numbers is working, even though you're hearing 111. You're also getting the communication of this couple, person number 3 and person number 37, that working together to create a child of 111. You follow? And then there's an additional correspondence, an inner meaning that is then synchronized with all kinds of things all over the universe that relate to these numbers.
That's why I think it's such a beautiful frequency for us. So do you have something that you'd love to offer to the viewers, something that people can connect more with your work, and perhaps, you know, you have something that people can get a special discount or a special offer?
Yeah, yes, and anybody who wants to, who's part of this, I'll give them 10% off on any of my products. From, you know, the prices are not on my website, but they can just email me, universalsong@yahoo.com. You probably provide that, universalsong@yahoo.com, and mention that they're part of this, and whatever they're ordering, I will give them that discount.
That's really, really awesome. Thank you so much, Randy, for your time, for your brilliance, for your integrity, for your deep mathematical mind, and your beautiful dedication to sound. How many years has it been now you've been on that path?
For teaching the sound part, years, professional music, as far as that part of my career, but over 30 years of teaching sound and manufacturing, tuning fork type of stuff. So, and teaching sacred geometry, which is another thing that I'm doing, and I make tuning forks to go with the sacred geometry. So if we want to recreate the Merkaba with tuning with sounds, I do all of the different angles and all the different lines in that. All are different ratios, and I make those as sets of tuning forks, which is really fun to hear. The components of a shape is a very trippy thing to do. I'll give them just one clue, though, just for the flower of life, since you have it up behind you, and I have it up behind me up there in wood. Okay, you have two different kinds of Vesica Pisces. The main one where you overlap the two main circles that create it to begin with, and then you get around that you get 6 smaller petals. Okay, so the width of the Vesica when it's 153, which is Mary Magdalene's number, yeah, and then the height will be 265, and it gives you the first 5 numbers of the square root of 3. Close enough. You don't even need it closer than that to do engineering work, because they only do about a 10,000th of an inch. And in the ancient days, they didn't have it as a square root. They called it the 153. It's a very important number. Okay, so then the width is 153 and the height is 265. Okay, then the little petals, the length of those little petals is the 153, and they're narrow, and it's 41, which is a prime number. So 3 numbers will allow you to create all the Vesica ratios in the flower of life.
That's amazing.
Yes, it's simple, and they're accurate too, with super decimal points. I'm not fudging this and trying to, force it. This stuff hits you over the head when you start looking at it. They just stumble out when I'm doing this work, Wow. So it's fun. That's a fun thing. And so why, if you're raising consciousness, why not use those? And by the way, in the Great Pyramid, the recent books by one of the civil engineer that did all the measurements very precisely, 153 is one of the key numbers in the pyramid. Multiply it by pi, and you get the height of the pyramid, 153 times pi.
Wow.
Very interesting.
That's amazing. Thank you.
And it goes on and on and on and on and on, you know what I mean? Once I get going, it's hard to shut down,
Yeah, absolutely.
I probably run over time here as typical,
All good. Randy, I'm so grateful to you. I'm so grateful to you being a guiding light in my world. And thank you so much for sharing your brilliance today with us.
You're welcome. And thank you, Thornton. Thank you. This is big fun. We got to meet here tonight and have some fun. And you got up early for this and jumped through some hoops to get here. And I hope that this is making you smile.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much, Randy, for your generous offer for people to get a discount. And please let people know your website. How do people find you?
Yeah, that www.universalsong.net right now. Universalsong, SONG.net. And then my numbers are there and the email, and then just to write me, you know, because I do custom stuff all the time. So just send me an email, no problem. I actually respond to them, you know.
Beautiful. Well, that's handy. And we'll also put the link below this video if you're watching this on YouTube. So
okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
All right,
so,
big fun.
Yay.
Big fun. That's PHUN, educated fun. PHUN, big fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sandy, for joining us, and sweet dreams there in California.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in. And thank you, Thornton. We are signing off here and looking forward to more exciting videos and amazing interviews from some more experts sharing the power of sound for transformation in our lives. So thanks so much, and catch us next time.